Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to speak today on behalf of my constituents in Brighton and indeed for anyone else who continues to be desperately concerned about the enormous risks to this country from the approach the government is taking to Brexit. Because for my mind, the bottom line is this, that the Prime Minister has no mandate for the extreme Brexit that she is pursuing. It was not on the ballot paper. And I see no contradiction between respecting the outcome of the referendum, which I do, we are leaving, and withholding consent to trigger Article 50 tomorrow, when the kind of Brexit which is being set out is so profoundly damaging to the people of this country, and when it's being pursued in profoundly undemocratic ways, with the absence of a white paper, the absence of safeguards for our economy, and with no guarantees for our key social and environmental priorities either. And I do have to say that it is a little surreal to hear so many honourable members acknowledge that extreme Brexit will be a disaster, but then announcing that they're going to go ahead and vote for it anyway. But very cleverly, the government has managed to morph a narrow vote in favour of leaving the EU into an apparently overwhelming mandate to leave the world's biggest trading zone, where we'll be cut off from the EU and its agencies and left increasingly desperate to make deals with any despot we can find. An armed deal with Turkey last weekend, a trade deal with a divisive and dangerous US president, to whom the Prime Minister has already clearly demonstrated she is either entirely unable or unwilling to stand up to. That is not what the people voted for. Nobody voted in the referendum to scrap environmental protection, consumer standards or workers' rights. Nobody voted to undermine the rights of UK citizens living in other EU countries, or indeed EU citizens living here in the UK. Nobody voted for future generations of young people being denied the rights to travel and work and study, equal at least to what they enjoy now. And nobody voted for the UK to become a tax haven, floating off the coast of Europe, clinging onto the coattails of Trump's America. Yet triggering Article 50 under the terms set out will set us on a course that allows all of these things to happen, because they are the logical consequence of Theresa May's extreme version of Brexit. Her agenda is essentially about sacrificing the many benefits of the single market on the altar of ending free movement. Now, it may be unpopular to say so, but it needs to be said that free movement has benefited our country in numerous ways. It benefits British people by giving them the opportunity to work and study and to live and to love in 27 other countries. It benefits our public services, especially the NHS, and it benefits our economy as a whole because EU nationals contribute more to our public finances than they take out. We would be a poorer country without the taxes EU nationals pay and the work they do in our hospitals, our care homes and our councils, and more importantly, our societies and our communities would be immeasurably the poorer as well. Now, the Prime Minister's agenda will also see us abandon the customs union and threatens a new economic model defined by a race to the bottom on corporate taxation, a model which, despite the Prime Minister's pledge to unite the country, will likely see inequality in Britain rise as spending for vital public services like the NHS is eroded yet further. Again, nobody voted for this on the 23rd of June either. On the contrary, many voted for more money to be invested in the NHS. I seem to recall 350 million a week. Yet, just last week, ministers released official figures showing they'll be cutting the NHS budget per head in real terms in 2018-19. And let's challenge this idea that these other trade agreements are going to somehow make up for the difference if we leave the single market. Now, research has shown quite clearly that even if we manage to do deals with the US, the EU, China, Russia, Canada, New Zealand, they would not anywhere near compensate for the loss to the economy of withdrawing from the single market. Now, for voters who support leaving the EU only if they were not personally worse off, that, I think, is crucial information. Now, the government has been forced grudgingly to allow Parliament a say on triggering Article 50, but it is massively insulting to squeeze this resentful scrap of a bill into a time frame that is entirely disproportionate to the immensity of its consequences. Doubly so when the bill throws us off a cliff edge. I will.
I'm most grateful to her. I'm just enjoying a blog post on her website from July the 13th, 2015, where she's commenting on the Greek situation under the hashtag #ThisIsACoop. She describes the IMF, the Eurozone and the ECB as the forces of darkness, finishing her post by saying, writing, "It's time that politicians here in Britain, no matter where they stand on the economics of the Greek situation, take a stand for the simple right of a nation to manage its own affairs." I still believe what she wrote back then.
See any contradiction with what I wrote back then and the position that I'm taking now? I have always been critical of certain actions of the ECB, and I will continue to be so. That does not mean that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Only someone who is enormously reckless would think that was a sensible way forward. Now, I want to say what is reckless is when this bill is going to throw us off a cliff edge entirely unnecessarily because it fails to include any mention, let alone give any details, of any transitional arrangements. So that means that once that clock starts ticking, once Article 50 has been triggered, if negotiations take longer than that, 2 years, we will then suddenly be thrown off into a world of WTO-only tariffs, which I can assure him his constituents will not thank him for. Now, I don't believe that democracy is well served by such recklessness. But in my last few moments, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to say a few words about the environment. It is an issue which has been conspicuous by its absence in most of the debate over the last few days. And I'm especially concerned that we need to have guarantees, real guarantees, to maintain environmental regulation at least as strong as current EU regulation. An Environmental Protection Act, crucially with its own court of arbitration, might be one way to deliver that. But we also need to make sure that there are clear ways of retaining our relationships with important European agreements like REACH on chemical safety, the European Chemicals Agency. We need UK environmental regulators and enforcement agencies ready to step into the shoes of the EU institutions that currently perform those roles. Those institutions need to be properly funded when the EU is no longer funding them. We need to ensure that the principles that underpin our environmental regulations are not lost, things like the precautionary principle. Right now, we have no guarantees, and we deserve those guarantees before Article 50 is triggered. And yet about this, as with so much else, there is no information. Now, leaders of the Leave campaign famously talk about taking back control. Well, if that means anything, it surely means that control must not only be about our departure, but about our destination. So democracy requires Parliament has ample opportunity to scrutinise the terms of the Brexit deal that emerges from negotiations. But it must also have the right for the country to continue to be given a say by way of a referendum on the proposed deal. I cannot vote for a bill that fails to provide those safeguards.